This time on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. Donald Trump has announced his tariffs. So what does it mean for the UK economy?
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Look, he's not exactly humble at the best of times, but when announcing global trade tariffs on his self-proclaimed Liberation Day, Donald Trump was even more pleased with himself than usual.
So we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff. In other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be, because we never charge anybody anything, but now we're going to charge.
For him, it's a no-brainer. To those on the receiving end, it's nonsensical. Why? Well, countries around the world now find the cost of doing business in the United States that much more expensive. And, special relationship or not, that includes the UK. Paul Kelso is Sky's business correspondent and therefore one of the busiest people on the planet right now. Paul, just explain exactly what we gained from Liberation Day.
Not a great deal. We got some clarity, which certainly businesses, government and the markets will welcome, even if it's clarity that this really is bad news. Tariffs, Donald Trump said, will be levied on exports to the US from the UK at 10%. That's the base rate, that's the lowest rate he's imposed across the board. It could have been worse. The European Union is looking at 20%, China 54%. Look at some of the developing, as we think of developing nations, but major manufacturers supplying the US. Vietnam 46%, Thailand 36%, Cambodia almost 50%. All countries that have moved manufacturing away from China to try and feed the US market, well, they're getting hammered. So the UK, it could have been worse, but make no mistake, this is a major blow to British industry and certainly to the government's hopes of securing somehow a carve-out from this. The Trump tariff show, which I think after we watched last night, it's pretty unlikely anyone was ever going to get that, except Russia, but that's another story.
Yeah, indeed. So why? Why do we think, compared to the European Union, compared to China, compared to any number of other countries, we did so well? In inverted commas, of course.
Indeed, relatively speaking. Well, I mean, if we follow Trump's logic, what really offends him is the US's trade deficit with nations. That is the countries from which it imports a great deal more than it exports. That's certainly the case with Mexico, Canada and China, its three biggest trading partners. It has huge deficits, hundreds of billions of dollars of deficits with those. That isn't the case with the UK. I mean, in a slight twist of the statistics, both the UK and the US say they have a trade surplus with each other. It comes down to how you calculate some services. But if we look at the UK's numbers, and I'm looking at 2023's numbers, so the most recent full ones this morning, goods. The UK imports $58 billion worth of goods from the US and it exports $60.4 billion of goods. So look, there's a tiny surplus there for the US. Services, which is the much greater part of the UK's trade with the US, that's more like we import about 50 billion and export 126 billion. But largely this applies to goods. So first of all, there isn't a huge injustice as he would frame it. But if you look at what the US itself thinks the UK does to it, so what tariffs do we apply to the US? If we look at the average tariff the UK imposes, it's 3.8% across the board. That's under the World Trading Rules, what's called most favoured nation. If you do have a tariff, you have to offer it to everyone. The average across the board for the UK is 3.8%. But in agriculture, it's much higher, 9.4%. And that is one area where clearly the US feels a little aggrieved. In the document it published last month, which prepared the ground for this measure, it talked about some areas where there are high tariffs that affect US exports. As 25% we levy on some kinds of fish and seafood, that's to protect Scottish fishing interests, 10% on American trucks, 10% on American cars, and about 6.5% on fertilisers. Somehow from that you come up with a number around 10%. That is what the business secretary said is about the average of some of those tariffs. Sure. So that seems to be where the numbers come from.
And we'll be back with Paul just a little later. But I want to hear from a business directly affected by these tariffs, and it is entirely coincidental that it involves whisky. Anthony Wills is the founder and managing director of the Kilchoman Distillery on Islay. Anthony, for those not as well versed in the amber nectar, just tell us about Kilchoman.
Our business was set up in 2005 in the response to the ever-increasing number of whisky enthusiasts looking for single malt and wanting to try new and different brands from the tried and tested ones. And so we've been in business now 20 years, and the island of Islay is famous around the world for its single malt. In every corner of the world, it's famous. So, we're very fortunate that we export to about 65 export markets around the world, and we're growing all the time.
Give us an idea then of just how much of your distillery's business is done with the United States.
Prior to COVID, it was about 15% of our total sales. It's dropped off a little bit since then, just with the challenges around the world. So it's in a very important market, and the Scotch whisky in general, it's one of the biggest export markets for the Scotch whisky industry, the USA. So that presents huge challenges for the industry dealing with this additional issue.
Walk me through your genuine emotional reaction when you heard what Donald Trump was saying last night. We all knew something was coming, but I suspect that when the words come out of his mouth, that's when reality truly hits.
Yeah, massively disappointing. I think for a few months we thought we were going to get away with not being hit with tariffs. And as it came close to the announcement, it was clear that there was going to be a reaction for everybody and all countries. So, look, I think it's just another disappointment because I think we're dealing with a lot of economic headwinds as it is.
In the short term, a 10% tariff being put on the whisky industry, will you be passing that cost directly onto the consumer?
I would say probably not. In 2019, when we had a much bigger tariff in place, 25%, we shared that with our importer, and we decided, probably quite rightly, that we needed to do the right thing for our consumers and to make sure that we were competitive. So we absorbed that between us. And this time round, it's slightly less, 10%. You can argue, we've not got away with it, but we're certainly in a better place than a lot of countries. And we will probably absorb the majority of that again.
So as yet, not enough to make you turn to the drink, Anthony?
Well, I think it does. I think it makes you challenge yourself hugely in areas that you didn't think you'd be having to challenge yourself with. And I look upon this, it's the 48 people I employ that I have a responsibility for. And that weighs heavily on my shoulders. And you just don't want all these things thrown in your face to make the challenge even greater than it is. And I think tariffs in this way is very protectionist. And will the population of USA be better off in the long run? The argument is probably not. But will this correct things in a way that the USA are in a better place for exports and imports moving forward? Well, we'll have to wait and see.
OK, Paul Kelso is back. Paul, look, that was just one distillery's view of the tariffs, and clearly we do export an awful lot of whisky. But what of the broader UK economy? Keir Starmer says it will be affected. Are we able to put a number on that?
It's hard to quantify right now. The Office for Budget Responsibility had a go last week and suggested that tariffs at around 20% could wipe out close to 0.6% of GDP. I think it was certainly due for Rachel Reeves's headroom. Remember when that was a big story? No more. There are much bigger economic fish to fry than Treasury accounting today. So we can't. It's quite hard to quantify right now. But there are two impacts. First of all, business hates it across the board, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in the service industries, they hate it. Two reasons. One is, if you're an exporter, this is bad news. Your prices have just gone up 10%. By the time this comes in, you sell something to the US, you're going to be paying, albeit the consumer is going to be paying a 10% tax. You might be able to offset some of that and keep the price down a little. Some of that will fall on the consumer in the States, but makes you much less attractive. But there's a second effect. If this becomes a trade war in which other countries retaliate with tariffs of their own, if the UK tries to remain neutral in that and doesn't increase tariffs, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, well, there's a danger that the UK becomes attractive as a dumping ground for those cheaper goods. So there are many, many companies worried about us becoming caught in the crossfire of a trade war by dumping of cheaper goods.
But isn't there just a very simple calculation at the heart of all this, Paul? If your costs go up, your margins come down, the amount of profits that you make will be reduced. And in times like that, people start looking at job cuts.
Absolutely. This is serious, serious stuff. The general cooling across the global economy looks like it will be really, really significant. I mean, the US is a massive player in global trade, and it has just declared trade war, literally, on everybody it trades with, including its biggest partners. There is no way that can happen without fundamental impact on the global economy. The UK cannot operate out with that, so it's going to hit home. Now, how badly remains to be seen.
But what about exemptions? Are there any industries that have escaped the tariffs here?
There's a clause in this executive order which says currently the pharmaceuticals are exempt from these tariffs.
We'll see how long that lasts.
Absolutely, and that clause talks about there being alternative tariff regimes, so another round, and it's included, as well as pharmaceuticals, interestingly, semiconductors, some of the stuff involved in the manufacture of chips, which is another, he's got a chip on his shoulder about chip manufacturing having left. It's hard to imagine, if he really wants to impact, that there won't be something more coming there. So the pharmaceutical industry still is, we've spoken to a medical devices manufacturer, they don't know whether they're covered or not by pharmaceuticals.
So, Paul, what are we going to do about this? Because the UK's response thus far has seemed, to me, to be a little bit muted. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer says that there are a range of levers that he has at his disposal, but I can't see them. He certainly hasn't pulled any of them yet.
There are levers. The bluntest and crudest is tariffs, which we've just seen the US deploy. There are non-tariff barriers, which getting back into the joyful world of Brexit discussions. There are quotas, tariff-based quotas, which we do apply to some agricultural products, beef and pork and the like, where you can import a certain amount and then tariffs apply after that. The real question is, does the UK retaliate? And I keep coming back to a conversation I had with a very senior minister back just before the US election, and with admirable candour, they were very clear. They said, as a small nation outside a major trading bloc, getting involved in a trade war doesn't make a lot of sense. Some have said it is a Brexit benefit because, why is the EU facing a 20% tariff? Well, frankly, it's a bigger and more muscular trading power. It's got some hefty tariffs, particularly on the automotive industry. So it's getting 20% because it's a bigger threat to the US. Now, we are still a big economy. It's right, 6th, 7th, 5th, depending on how we count it. The UK is a big market, but what leverage have we got? There is a deal that the business secretary and the government have been working very hard on. They thought they had a fair wind out of that Oval Office visit by Sir Keir Starmer. And, at play in there, what have we got? We're levying digital services tax on those big US tech companies worth 800 million, nearly £1 billion a year. That's a bit of leverage. You might give something back. But what have we really got? What can we really flex that would hurt?
Isn't that what's hog-tying us? The fact that we are locked in negotiations over a free trade agreement right now. We can't put in reciprocal tariffs because as soon as we do that, negotiations and the FTA come to a grinding halt. Trump's got us over a barrel, hasn't he?
Yeah, to a degree, yes. I mean, I think we have to see, the previous government tried for a long time to get a trade deal and couldn't, and it never looked likely. What we're talking about here with the trade deal that this government's trying is not a comprehensive free trade agreement because the US does very few of those. They're hugely complex, and the one here always falls over on agriculture because we have what we consider to be higher standards. We don't want hormone-treated, chlorinated produce coming here, and that seems to be non-negotiable. This is much smaller. It's looking at about digital technology and doing a smaller deal. I've always seen it really as being a way that this government hoped it could avoid precisely what's happened, because I refer to that conversation I had back before the election. They've known this is coming, and they've known the limitations on its deal. So I asked myself, well, what else can you do? I mean, the starting point as well, of course, for everyone apart from the United States, certainly in Europe, Western Europe in these discussions, is that tariffs and barriers, financial and otherwise, to trade are madness. They harm your own citizens. Of course, there have been long-term impacts. Allowing manufacturing to shift to the east and cheaper labour nations has had massive effects. You have to go to the Midlands and the northeast of Britain to see that, and Trump is very focused on that, and the Rust Belt in the US. But the benefit and the virtues in cheap goods for your own citizens, and frankly, it's helped deliver a more peaceful world. It's gone hand in hand. And so the instincts of the politicians sitting looking at this, not just in the UK, but chancelleries across Europe, is that this is madness. Less barriers, not more. And so I think the starting point is escalation is a bad idea. There will be industries who absolutely want it. I spoke to the biggest steel stockist and supplier in the UK yesterday. They sit between the mills and the market, construction industry and the rest of it. And they want a muscular response because they're worried about being flooded by dumped steel. But there are other businesses who think it would be disastrous. And that's where we sit.
Thanks, Paul. And for more of his analysis, just head to skynews.com. And if you've got a moment, do give us on the podcast team some feedback. There is a survey link in the description. The Daily is back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.